Good morning, evening, or night, everybody. I'm Jax, and in this video, I'll be going over what I think is Splatoon 3's biggest long-term issue. I'll start with what that issue is, why I think so, and maybe some ways to fix it. So without further ado, let's super jump into it. Splatoon 3 has only been out a few weeks as of the release of this video, and after putting in a decent chunk of time into the game, as well as seeing what other members of the community are saying, I can confidently say that the biggest long-term issue for Splatoon 3 is that the gameplay as a whole is inconsistent, and it's often exacerbated by being too grind-heavy, which results in a lack of accessibility to newer players, and a tedious slog that gets boring relatively quickly. Now this video will mainly focus on the grind-heavy aspects of the game, but Splatoon 3 also suffers from a subpar netcode, a lack of content, odd UI choices, etc. The game has a lot of issues right now, but I'm confident the majority of them will be patched, updated, and fixed as time goes on. The netcode, probably not, but that deserves its own video. But the game will receive more content and balance patches and updates, so there is hope that a majority of issues present right now will be addressed going forward. Long term though, it's all about the grind. And what do I even mean that the game is too grind heavy? Well, I mean that there's a lot of stuff in the game which, in my opinion, takes too long to unlock or is such a small reward for a comparatively large time investment. Now, I did tweet a small thread that got some people riled up, including some who said things along the lines of, the point of stuff taking a long time to get is to flesh out the game, or it's supposed to take a long time, you're not supposed to grind the entire game in 2 weeks, or have you ever even played Splatoon? Blah, blah, blah. And to all those people I say, fair points, but you missed my point. I do agree there should be rewards which take a long time, or be markers to show how dedicated someone is to the game, and how much time they've put in. However, I never said I wanted to unlock everything in the game in 2 weeks, but I also don't want to have to play a game every day for 5 years to unlock everything. I feel that Splatoon 3 has a lot of artificially inflated achievements, a needlessly broken gear system, and a lack of a clear vision for the future, which makes grinding tedious and creates a high bar for entry for the game's newer players. I'll get into why I feel that way over the course of the video, but just know I agree. The game should have things in it that take a long time to get. I myself am not opposed to grinding in video games. I love RPGs. I've fully completed a ton of different games, especially really long ones. And grinding in games can be really fun and rewarding, but only if the gameplay required to grind is actually fun and enjoyable. If anything, making a player grind in a game is a great litmus test for a game's issues and flaws. Players will naturally push a game to its limits by looking for any way to lessen the grind, which reveals flaws in the game's design, structure, and overall replayability in general. Now, the inflated grind in Splatoon 3 can be found all over the game, from the gear system to ranked modes, the catalog to table turf, and beyond. I'll start with the gear system, which has been bad since Splatoon 1, and regardless of its quality of life changes since, remains subpar and a terrible way to approach implementing abilities in a competitive game. Splatoon 3 did implement the option to change the main ability on a piece of gear, the option to level up gear past 3 stars to gain more experience, and the option to add slots with money instead of super sea snails. But the system itself is still based on luck and a lot of grinding, which for a fundamental aspect of a competitive game, where abilities do matter, is suboptimal to say the least. I could make a whole video on how the gear system in these games is garbage, but for now, just know it's not great. For starters, to unlock an ability on a piece of gear, it costs 2,000 experience points. The second ability then costs 8,000, and the third costs 14,000. Regardless of the rarity of the piece of gear, which is a change from Splatoon 1 and 2, where more common gear could be leveled more quickly and rarer gear took a little bit longer. Now, Turf War gives a minimum of 300 experience points if you lost the match and didn't ink a thing, and a maximum of 1,400 points a win if you inked over 500. Now, Ranked gives a minimum of around 100 points if you're KO'd in under a minute, and a maximum of 2,500 points if you win with a knockout. So fully leveling a piece of gear takes a minimum of around 18 wins in Turf War, or 10 knockouts in Ranked. If you translated that into time, it's roughly 54 minutes of Turf War and anywhere from 10 to 50 minutes in Ranked, depending on how fast you knocked out a match. So if you were absolutely perfect, you could level a piece of gear in 10 minutes if every single match in your Ranked mode you knocked out in under a minute. But realistically, it's going to be a lot longer than that. Now, you can also use a drink ticket to increase your gear experience by 50%, meaning it takes roughly half the time if you have a ticket for the ability you want, though. So perfectly optimally, you can level up a piece of gear in less than 10 minutes if you got a bunch of knockouts and Ranked in a row while using a ticket. That's pretty nice, but it's not reality. Most of the time, you won't get the desired abilities rolling on the piece of gear that you want. You won't win all of your matches, and you might not have a ticket at all. So in reality, it can take anywhere from 45 minutes to several hours just to level up one piece of gear. And that's just to level the piece of gear. What if you get abilities that you don't want? Well, you can always swap them out using chunks, and that's awesome, right? Well, how do you get chunks? By scrubbing gear, grinding in Salmon Run, or randomly from the shellout machine. So how many chunks does it take to add an ability to a piece of gear? For the first of any ability on a specific piece, it takes 10 chunks. If you already have that piece on and you want to add another one, say I already have swim speed and I want to add a second swim speed ability, it takes 20 chunks. If I already have 2 swim speeds and I want to add a third, it takes 30 chunks. So to get from nothing to 3 of the same ability on one piece of gear, it takes 60 chunks. So how do you grind them efficiently? Well, you can get 3 from leveling a piece of gear, which I just said takes at least 45 minutes to several hours in reality. Once it's leveled, you can scrub it to get those chunks for yourself and reset all of the experience on the piece of gear, or you can re-roll it, which gives you those 3 chunks, but re-rolls the abilities. But you need Super Sea Snails to get that, and those are in limited supply. So you get 3 chunks for possibly several hours of work, and you need 10 just to get 1 ability. But you can keep using gear after it's fully leveled to get a random chunk, which is a new thing. So how long does it take to get the random chunk after you've fully leveled? Well, longer than it takes to fully level the gear in the first place. It takes 28,000 experience points to get an extra chunk. Now granted, if you used a drink ticket, that increases your experience by 50%, and you increased your gear's star rank past the 3 stars, you can get more experience, but we'll get to that in a bit. The 28,000 experience you would need would take 12 ranked knockouts in a row or 20 Turf War wins. So at least an hour in Turf or 12 minutes in Ranked. And that's perfectly optimal for just one single chunk. If you were going to grind chunks solely using this method, putting a triple on a piece of gear would take probably upwards of 60 hours or dozens and possibly hundreds of matches. But let's say you did just the 3 chunk method since it's faster. Well, you'd only need around 20 hours, but you'd need hundreds of thousands of gold to be able to scrub the chunks off that gear. And this is assuming you get perfect luck on what chunks you want. Some people might say, well, it's meant to be done over the course of weeks and months. Well, what if I don't have a lot of time to play, or I'm a competitive player and I decided to pick up a new weapon and I need to make a new build for a tournament that's in 3 hours? Well, then I'd either have to plan weeks in advance to grind some gear, or I'm out of luck. That's kind of ludicrous. You can, as people have pointed out, split up a triple across 3 pieces of gear. So let's say I wanted 3 swim speed sub abilities, I could put 1 on 3 different pieces of gear for a total of 30 chunks. But that still requires a lot of chunk grinding, and that your build is limited in terms of swapping in pieces of gear, since everything you swap in might need to have that one random ability on it. Granted, the tickets do affect what rolls when and what doesn't, so if you just needed 1 swim speed on a piece of gear, you could level it up with a swim speed ticket and probably get that single ability on it, but it's still going to take at least half an hour, 45 minutes, or an hour. Now, Salmon Run does make it easier to grind chunks, since you get random chunks on the pieces of gear you get after you receive your bonuses from around 1200p to 3000p in Salmon Run. But once you get over 3000p in the Salmon Run rewards, you only get the next piece of gear every 400 points, making long-term grinding for Salmon Run relatively unviable, at least for chunks, since that equates to only about 1 to 3 chunks per Salmon Run shift, which typically takes around 10 minutes if you factor in loading times and finding a team. That's still better than the normal method, but that's if the Salmon Run shift is successful, which depends on if your teammates are competent enough to help you win and you don't have any connection issues, some things that are out of a lot of players' control. Now let's say you got your ideal gear set perfectly tuned for your weapon. It probably took you dozens, if not nearly 100 hours, and it's only on those pieces of gear. If you want a new shirt or shoes, or the meta changes, or you want to pick up a new weapon that needs a new build, you've got to do the whole thing over again just to get what you want. But Jax, you say, there's the 4 and 5 star freshness, which helps you get chunks by using that gear. You're right, but even that has a grind to it. Some pieces already have stars on them, but let's assume yours has no stars. To get 1 star on a piece of gear, it costs 1 Super Sea Snail or 10,000 gold. To upgrade to 2 stars costs 1 Super Sea Snail or 30,000 gold. 3 stars cost 5 Super Sea Snails or 50,000 gold. At 3 stars, your gear should have all 3 slots. If you want to get the 4th and the 5th, which are essentially extra bonuses designed to allow you to grind chunks passively while playing normally, how much does it cost? Well, you probably think a decent bit, but nothing crazy. Well, 4 stars, it's 10 Super Sea Snails or 100,000 gold. And 5 stars, forget about it. It's 200,000 gold or 20 Super Sea Snails. That's just ridiculous. To put that in perspective, the top Splatfest rank which you can get is called Ruler. And if you get that and your team wins, you get 24 Super Sea Snails. If you lose, you get 21. And the Splatfest has only occurred 1 time in Splatoon 3's lifespan, at least Splatfest that can give you Sea Snails, and it only happens once a month. So you could upgrade 2 pieces of gear from level 4 to 5 stars, and you'd only have 1 or 4 snails left for the month. That's just insane. And what do you get as a bonus for 5 stars? A measly 10% extra experience. So you'll get that singular chunk after 25,200 experience instead of 28,000, which is still more experience than it takes to level the 3 slots originally. So your best bet is to kind of do a combination of everything and hope you get lucky, which eventually kind of just feels lame. Granted, tickets are definitely a help for this, but if you don't get a ticket with the ability that you're grinding for, you're out of luck. Okay, well, gear is definitely a slog, but that's fine. Gear isn't the most critical thing for most players. Some people only wear it for fashion anyway. So what? Well, even if you only want to wear gear for fashion, just getting it is kind of a grind too. The shops only have 6 gear options a day, and you can only order one thing from merch. Luckily, you can order as many times as you want from Annie, but she typically only has I think 8 pieces of gear available a day. So in game, you have 19 possible pieces of gear, but you will always have repeats that you can either buy with a different main ability or use to increase the star level of your gear. And Annie could have nothing you want or something you already have. So just getting the pieces of gear that you do want could take days or weeks or months if your luck is bad. It's not too bad right now since the game does have a smaller pool of available gear, but think what it'll be like when the game adds even more. What if the pool of gear is 3 or 4 or 500 pieces deep? Imagine trying to get one singular piece of gear that you want. You could get it the day it comes out. It could be months in advance. Who knows? But overall, getting gear is annoying. I wouldn't say it's inexcusable. The system does work, but it has its flaws. Next up, how do you buy the gear? Well, you need money. Money is not super difficult to get, thankfully. Salmon Run bonuses tend to be very good for money, with the ability to gain 5, 16, 32,000 gold from just one single capsule in Salmon Run. Rank matches and turf matches with money boosting tickets can easily rack up cash pretty quickly, and also thankfully tickets are not as hard to come by as they used to be. But gear and associated stuff is expensive. Cheap gear can be a few hundred gold, but 3-slot gear can often be 10,000 plus, with the aforementioned star upgrades being hundreds of thousands of gold. Not to mention locker items and decorations, which can be anywhere from a few hundred gold to several 100,000 gold. In general, having more to spend money on is a great thing though. Splatoon 1 and 2 had almost nothing to spend your money on late in the game's lifespan, so people would just sit around with max money with nothing to buy. I'm really glad that this has been fixed, even if it's annoying when I want to buy something and I don't have the money. But that brings me to the other grind in Splatoon 3, the game's cosmetics, namely badges. This game has a lot of badges, and I mean a lot, that are specifically locked behind what I see as an obscene grind. Take for instance the special wins badges. To unlock the normal versions of these badges, you have to win just 100 matches with a weapon that has a specific special. That's not too bad, honestly, and it'll happen pretty naturally. But the golden version needs 1,200 wins, and there are 15 specials in the game as of this video's release, with possibly more on the way. If you wanted to complete this game in its state right now, just for these badges alone, it would take 18,000 wins. And let's say they're all Turf War wins, which are 3 minutes long, that would be 900 hours or 37.5 full days of Turf War. Want another insane badge? Killing the Kohozuna 1,200 times in Salmon Run. I don't even think I have to explain why that's nigh impossible, at least in freelance. But the badges in general often also are very sporadic. You don't get them consistently, meaning you don't really have a good sense of progression and actually feel like you're doing anything. More consistent markers for progress as well as more transparency in what can be unlocked when would help tremendously, but I'll get into how this is fixed later. Speaking of Salmon Run though, the rewards for this mode are just abysmal to grind. The Kohozuna does not have a set reward, so you could win on the lowest rank in the game and get a gold scale, or you could win at Hazard Max and get 5 bronze scales. There's no rhyme or reason to the rewards, and no guarantee you'll even beat the boss when it shows up, because a lot of people who are playing Salmon Run are just plainly incompetent. Now obviously, requiring a grind for rewards, especially for cosmetics or achievements, is not foreign or a new thing. Tons of games do it, and I'm not saying Splatoon 3 shouldn't. Long-term rewards are awesome. They incentivize players to play more and for longer, they keep the game active and alive for longer, and they give people more to do over the course of the game's lifespan. But when they become excessive, and needlessly so, that's when it becomes a problem. And when a core mechanic of the game, in this case the gear system, is reduced to a boring, tedious grind that lacks any fun or creative way to game the system, it actively hurts the game and the community. Newer people who already have to deal with the lack of good tutorials in this game now have to figure out how to navigate a mess of a gear system that relies on RNG and a lengthy grind to get remotely good gear builds. It's just dumb, not to mention how the gear system impacts competitive players. So how do you fix this? Well, for one, if the gear system is not getting a total overhaul, you can at least reduce the amount of chunks it takes to fill slots. Instead of 10, 20, and 30 chunks for each respective slot of the same ability, it should be 3, 6, and 9. First off, because it's much more reasonable, but it still requires you to play the game a little bit. And 2, because it plays off of the 3 theming of Splatoon 3. Next, lower the cost of upgrading to 4 and 5 star freshness for gear, at least for the snail pricing. It should not take 20 snails to upgrade to 5 star freshness. It should take like 2 to 5. The money amount is fine. That should be high since snails are a rarer currency. These changes alone would make optimal gear much easier to get while still requiring ample playtime to accumulate adequate amounts of chunks. And if the game isn't giving an entire overhaul to the gear system, I feel like this is the best way forward. Next up, either lower the amount of wins for those insane badges to at least 1,000 or add more badges in between. Give players a bronze, a silver, a platinum, copper, tin, steel, whatever for 250, 500, 750 wins or something similar. Or implement some sort of way to buy badges for really high amounts of gold, or be able to randomly win them in the shellout machine, for very low odds of course, to lower the time investment some people need to get them. Having those consistent markers of progress, and including grayed out badges with unlock requirements on the same page that they show normal badges, would help to create a palpable sense of progression that would spur players to keep playing instead of just wondering what random badge they'll get next. It'd be really nice if you could see, oh, I need to do this to get this badge, instead of just playing and praying that you get it. Also, speaking of the shellout machine, make each roll 10,000 gold instead of 30,000. It will still cost a decent amount, but it's pretty exorbitant right now. For Table Turf Battle, which I haven't really touched on, just make level 2 wins give 200 experience and level 3 wins give 300 experience. That's really all it needs to make it less grind heavy. It rewards people who play on higher difficulties. That's it. For Salmon Run, just fix the broken King Salmonid rewards. Guarantee that a win on Professional and above gets you a golden scale or at least 5 silver scales. Also, allow gear to be obtained at intervals of 200 points indefinitely to make grinding chunks in Salmon Run way easier. And while we're at it, give more capsules in Salmon Run. Make the regular rewards available up until 2,400 points instead of 1,200. Now, some things can remain inflated or hard to get, but just lessen the time investment needed to get good gear. Having a core system of the game locked behind this huge time investment spurns new players and actively hurts people who can't play as much as others. The main thing the grind in Splatoon 3 shows is that repeated gameplay just feels tedious. Focusing on wins makes the community more negative and toxic overall, and in general just makes the game less fun, because people are focused on how long they have to play to get something rather than just playing to have fun and getting something good naturally. It's great to have goals in mind and stuff in place for longer term players, but even long term players get shafted in Splatoon 3. For those of you that will eventually get 4 and 5 star gear, it only gives you 6 and 10% extra experience respectively, which is essentially nothing. It's a match or two less experience. It should be half, or it should be a quarter or half as much experience, not 10%. The players who will grind with a weapon for a long time will just get a gold badge and that's it. For 1200 wins, I think the player deserves more than just one stinking badge. At least have some better documentation of that journey to show I won 250, and then 500, and then 750, and then 1000. My main worry though is that for the vast majority of Splatoon fans who only play a few hours a week and can't put in dozens of hours because they work or they have kids, they go to school, etc., the game might seem like a waste of time because all of the cool stuff is just unobtainable. Splatoon 3 is great, don't get me wrong, but the curve at which it rewards players is not smooth or well defined, which results in an awkward feeling that the game is too grind heavy, but that you also are impatient because you want stuff. What the game needs is a common, constant, and consistent reward structure that gives players who play a lot and players who play a little something to work toward without feeling like they have to spend every single waking minute playing if they don't want to, or like they'll never get anything meaningful in the game. Splatoon 3's grind-heavy nature actively punishes players who cannot commit large chunks of their time to the game, and that just isn't fair. Throw in the timed rewards from the catalog, like the 0.1% chance limited time banner and title from the Shellout machine, and you have a recipe for players just saying, why even bother? Since it seems like more trouble than it is worth to actually try. Don't get me wrong, I love Splatoon 3 and the Splatoon series as a whole, but this flaw is something that's been around for a while and seriously needs work. Including cosmetics, collectibles, and a bunch of quality of life updates to the gear system was nice, but now it's time to really fine-tune them into actually enjoyable and playable components of the experience that add a sense of accomplishment and progression rather than a dull, tedious grind for 3 chunks and a fistful of gold every few hours. Because that's really what it comes down to. Splatoon 3 at its core is just not fun enough to grind, in my opinion. The gameplay is inconsistent due to poor matchmaking, bad netcode, a handful of awfully designed map and mode combinations, a restrictive rotation system, and 4 Splatfests, which result in a lack of real, balanced, and competitive matches, which is where the game is the most fun. The potential is there, and the game is very young, but it's a worrying sign, at least for me. But this is just my opinion. What do you think? Am I spot on, or am I waxing poetic about a problem that doesn't exist? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you like the video, please obliterate that like button and demolish subscribe for more Splatoon content. I'll be putting out more videos in this sort of less edited, laid-back style if this one does well. But for now, I hope your gear grind goes well and your Shellout machine luck is bountiful. As always, I'm Jext. Have a good one.